A black man walked into the very bank he founded, only to be thrown out like a threat. 30 minutes later, he came back, not to demand justice, but to dismantle the entire system that disrespected him. 8:59 a.m., the glass doors of the Midtown Atlanta branch swung open, letting in a crisp breeze to the morning sunlight. Julian Cole, 38, stepped through like any other customer. No suit, no luxury watch, just a neatly pressed pale blue shirt, khaki pants, and clean white sneakers. No one in the bank that morning, customers or staff, recognized the calm, soft-spoken man as the founder of the bank itself. Today, Julian wasn't here as a CEO. No press, no formal meetings. He was here for a simple transaction, to withdraw $15,000 in cash from his personal account, no different from what any other customer might request. As he passed one of the teller windows, he caught a glimpse of a middle-aged white man in a navy blazer, casually receiving $20,000 in cash. No questions asked, no extra forms, just a polite smile and a nod. Julian's grip tightened slightly on the strap of his bag. He knew this feeling, the quiet undercurrent of difference no one ever says out loud. When it was his turn, Julian stepped up to the window where a blonde woman, probably in her early 30s, stood. Her name tag read Rachel Monroe. No smile, no greeting. She simply slid a form across the counter, her voice cold and clipped. "You need to fill this out." Julian looked at her for a few seconds before calmly leaning down to complete the withdrawal slip. It wasn't the paperwork. It was the tone, the lack of eye contact, the way she didn't even glance at the driver's license he handed over. He'd been here before. Too many times. She gave a quick glance at the amount on the form, then slid it back toward him. "We don't process large withdrawals like this." Julian raised an eyebrow. "I just watched that gentleman withdraw $20,000. Not a single question." Rachel pursed her lips. "It's different." "Different how?" Julian asked, his voice calm, but sharp like a blade drawn through silk. Rachel turned away slightly, her eyes drifting to the glass-walled office in the back, where Diana Caldwell, the branch manager, stood with arms crossed, watching. One subtle nod. That was all Julian needed to know the truth. His gaze didn't move from Rachel Monroe, who was now avoiding his eyes, pretending to be suddenly occupied with unmarked paperwork in front of her, as if he'd just asked for something illegal. $15,000 is too large, Julian repeated, his voice low but razor-sharp. "That's interesting, because the gentleman who just walked out had $20,000 in cash, and no one batted an eye." Rachel inhaled sharply, her eyes fixed on her desk, arms crossed as if to erect a barrier between them. "That was a different situation," she said, her voice coated with performative politeness. "Different how?" Julian asked, unwavering. "Was it the amount, or was it the person?" She bit her lip, offering no reply. But Julian didn't need one. The faint nod from Diana Caldwell still echoed in his memory, a silent signal far too familiar, an unspoken glance, yet powerful enough to change how someone gets served. Enough to sanitize prejudice behind the word procedure. Julian's voice dropped even lower, steady like a war drum. "I have ID. My account holds more than I'm trying to withdraw. I've followed every rule. So tell me, Rachel, what exactly is making you uncomfortable?" Rachel tightened her lips, then turned toward the back. "I'll call the manager." "Good," Julian replied, rising to his full height. "I'd like to speak with her, too." The room seemed tense. A few heads turned, some curious, some awkward, but most avoided eye contact. One older woman near the customer service desk, Catherine Morgan, met Julian's gaze with a soft, sympathetic smile. But he didn't return it. He'd seen that brand of harmless civility his whole life. The manager's door opened. Diana Caldwell stepped out, her black blazer sharp and crease-free, heels clicking across the tile like a warning bell. Her eyes swept over Julian not with welcome, but with assessment, like he was a situation to be handled. Every step she took toward the counter felt calibrated. Dark gray suit, nude polished nails. The kind of smile trained to say everything and mean nothing. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice sugary sweet, like artificial sweetener. something Julian could detect from the first syllable. I understand you're experiencing a bit of difficulty with your transaction. Julian gave a calm nod, eyes steady. I simply asked to withdraw $15,000 from my personal account. I provided all required documentation, and yet I was denied. I'm unclear as to why. Diana tilted her head, the classic posture for appearing reasonable when talking to someone they've already judged as irrational. We have certain enhanced security procedures for high-value transactions, she said, resting her hand on the same withdrawal form Rachel had been sliding around like a hot potato. Just a safety measure. Nothing personal, of course. Julian smirked. Funny, the man who withdrew $20,000 right before me didn't seem to face any of those procedures. A slight twitch appeared at Diana's jawline, but the smile on her lips remained fixed, held in place like a cracked porcelain mask. I can't comment on another customer's transaction, she replied, her tone shifting from syrupy sweet to legally sterilized. But in this case, I'll need to verify the source of funds, recent deposit activity, and other relevant information. Julian crossed his arms, his gaze turning cold. You have a computer in front of you. The account, the deposits, everything, you can see it. You don't need to verify. You just need to open your eyes. A quiet clack echoed as someone at a nearby counter dropped a pen. Diana blinked. Rachel stood frozen beside her, face slowly draining of color. But Julian wasn't finished. You're using the word procedure like a shield to justify something indefensible. And the thinner that shield gets, the clearer I see what you really believe. Sir, Diana began, but Julian raised a hand. Don't sir me, just process the transaction. Or, he pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up. I'll start recording. And I promise, this video won't just get a few views. The air in the branch thickened like fog. Diana's eyes flicked toward the entrance. Logan Price, the security guard, leaned casually against the wall near the door. All she had to do was nod, and procedure would grow muscle. Julian knew that, but this time he didn't budge. Diana Caldwell didn't say another word, just a small tilt of her head toward the entrance. And Logan Price, with broad shoulders and a blank stare, understood the unspoken order. Julian stayed rooted in place, phone in hand, the screen glowing, ready to capture every second. He didn't move, didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto Diana's, like he was encoding every micro-expression into memory. Logan approached. His footsteps echoed across the suddenly silent lobby. He didn't say anything at first, just stationed himself beside Julian, his frame taut, his hands ready. I'm going to ask you to leave the premises, Logan said, voice flat, mechanical. I'm a customer, Julian replied, slowly, each word landing like stone on concrete. And you don't have a right to put your hands on me just because your manager doesn't like the way I'm asking for what's legally mine. Logan didn't answer. His hand reached out, gripping Julian's arm as if he were a threat to be neutralized, not the man who'd founded the very institution they were standing in. This time, Julian didn't pull away. You really want to do this? He asked, eyes locked on Logan. In front of everyone? On camera? But Logan's grip only tightened. With a sharp jerk, he yanked Julian off balance, twisting his shoulder backward as he shoved him toward the exit. The entire bank lobby fell silent. The sound of keyboards stopped. Rachel Monroe stood frozen at the counter, face drained of color. Diana stood motionless, saying nothing, doing nothing. She didn't need to. Her goal had been achieved. He was being removed. As Julian was shoved through the doorway, his back slammed against a glass frame, causing the floor to tremble slightly. A dull ache shot up his spine, but he didn't cry out. He just tightened his grip around the phone. Still recording, his eyes colder than the March wind outside in Atlanta. And then, just as Logan held the door open, a shadow moved. Andre Walker, the bank's second security guard, black, early 30s, stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He simply bent down and picked up the ID that Logan had tossed to the ground like trash. Andre wiped off the dust gently, as if handling something fragile, something sacred, then handed it back to Julian. This place, Andre said quietly, just loud enough for Julian to hear, has always been like this. Their eyes met. A heavy pause lingered, waited with the soundless growl of a system grinding behind them. Julian took the ID without a word, but something in his gaze had changed. A fire had been lit. He stood outside the Midtown Atlanta branch, spine straight, fist steady. In his hand, the ID card still held Andre's warmth, not from the sun, but from compassion. The rare kind, the kind not yet stripped away by fake smiles and silent policies. Andre remained by the door, not resisting exactly, but no longer on the inside either. "Do you know who I am?" Julian asked, his eyes still locked on Logan, the same man who had just thrown him out of the very institution he built. Andre nodded slightly, voice low like a breeze sneaking through a revolving door. "I know. Knew the moment you walked in." "Then why didn't you step in?" Andre glanced around, then looked down, speaking slowly. "Because here, if I speak up, I lose my job." He chuckled softly, an empty laugh. "But I think I just lost it anyway." Julian stared at him for a long time, not judging, just understanding. Andre's eyes were full of something Julian remembered seeing in the mirror during his early startup days. Silent exhaustion, buried defiance. "This," Andre continued, voice steady, "it's not just about one man being denied a withdrawal. It's about a system built to push us out, to keep us in the background." Julian clenched the ID in his hand. The plastic edge bit into his skin, but he didn't let go. That feeling, sharp, real, awakening, was necessary. Then he pulled out his phone, not to record again. This time, to make a call. "Thomas, I need you here. Immediately." The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "On my way. 15 minutes. Andre looked at Julian, eyebrows raised. "Someone important?" he asked. Julian smiled, a gleam in his eyes like a blade freshly honed after its first strike. "The chief operating officer. Someone Diane and Rachel have probably never dared look in the eye." Andre let out a laugh, a small one but genuine. For the first time that day, his eyes lit up. "Then I'm staying right here with you," Andre said. "I want to see their faces when they realize the man they threw out owns the entire bank." 12 minutes later, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade pulled up in front of the Midtown Atlanta branch. The engine cut off. The door opened. Thomas Whitaker stepped out as if he carried gravity itself within a 3-mile radius. Tailored navy suit, razor-sharp crease. Sunlight caught the silver-rimmed sunglasses resting perfectly on his nose. No name tag. No introductions. Power introduced itself. Julian Cole stood waiting, hands in his pockets, face calm, chiseled like cold marble. Andre Walker stood beside him, still wearing a security cap, but his gaze had changed, like an extra in a movie who'd just been handed the lead role. Thomas extended his hand to Julian. A brief, precise handshake, as efficient as a contract signed and sealed. "They didn't recognize you?" Thomas asked, tilting his head slightly to glance through the glass doors. "Not at all," Julian replied. "They threw me out like trash." Thomas didn't comment further. He simply pulled his phone from his inside pocket and made a quick internal call. His voice was calm, clear, commanding. "Prepare temporary reassignment papers for the Midtown branch manager. Send them directly to PR." He hung up. Then he looked back at Julian. "Want to come in with me?" Julian shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "No need. I want to see their faces when you walk in alone." Thomas nodded and walked straight through the glass doors. Alone, inside the bank, Diana Caldwell was mid-conversation with Rachel Monroe, a coffee cup still untouched in her hand. They both turned when a sharply dressed man entered, someone who looked like he had just walked off Wall Street and into their lobby. Rachel leaned in and whispered, "Who is that?" Diana squinted, but before she could respond, Thomas placed a sleek ID badge flat on the counter in front of them. Thomas Whitaker, Chief Operating Officer of Cold Dominion Financial. Rachel's hand trembled. Her coffee cup slipped, crashed into the counter, dark liquid pooling fast. Diana stood frozen. Her lips moved, barely forming words. I didn't know." Thomas cut her off, his voice sharp, deliberate, like a gavel striking down judgment. Well, now you do. He glanced toward the glass entrance, where Julian stood, arms folded, gaze sharp and unyielding. He no longer needed to smile. And you're about to learn what happens when a system that thinks it's untouchable mistakes its founder for someone unworthy of being let in. Thomas Whitaker stood at the center of the lobby like he was orchestrating the heartbeat of American finance. I want every staff member currently present to report to the main transaction floor, he said, not loudly, but each word rang out across the marble room like a bell tolling at high noon. Diana Caldwell swallowed hard. Rachel Monroe scrambled to mop up the spreading coffee, her complexion now paper white. Logan Price stepped in from the entrance, eyes flicking nervously, as if waking from a sleepwalk into a nightmare. Within 2 minutes, every employee was assembled in a quiet semicircle around Thomas. Their eyes darted, uncertain. Some curious, others shaken, a few terrified. Thomas raised a hand and pointed toward the glass doors. Every head turned. Julian Cole stepped in, not as the polished CEO they had seen on magazine covers. No silk tie, no $1,000,000 timepiece. Just a man in a light blue button-down and spotless sneakers. The same man who had been dragged out of this very bank barely 30 minutes earlier. Silence felt like snowfall in a chapel. "Let me introduce you," Thomas said, voice steady and slow. "This is Julian Cole, founder of Cole Dominion Financial Group, CEO of the entire system you work under, and the man who laid the very first brick of the branch that you threw out today." A sharp gasp echoed from the corner. Rachel Monroe dropped into her chair, face drained of all color. Diana stood motionless, eyes wide, unblinking. And Logan? He quietly unhooked his radio, placed it on the desk, and took one step back. But it wasn't over yet. From behind Julian, Andre Walker stepped forward, still in a security uniform, but this time his posture upright, shoulders squared. He placed a firm hand on Julian's shoulder, then turned to face the room. "I've worked here 6 years," he said, voice steady. "Seen things like this at least 20 times. But this time is different, because this time the man they profiled was the owner." A ripple of murmurs spread through the lobby. One of the tellers, Malik Simmons, spoke up, stunned. "Wait, Julian Cole?" He blinked in disbelief. "I wrote my senior thesis on your fintech innovations. I thought you were based in New York or D.C. I didn't think." Julian cut him off, gently but firmly. "I'm exactly where I need to be, to witness firsthand how a system I built is being run with prejudice and humiliation." He turned to Diana. "I gave you a chance. One look, one glance at an ID, but you chose bias over responsibility. And now, everyone sees the consequence." A beat of silence. Then Julian's voice rang out, sharp as a scalpel. "As of this moment, every employee directly involved in this morning's incident is hereby suspended pending investigation. Organizational restructuring begins now." The air in the Midtown Atlanta branch turned heavy as iron. No one moved. No one spoke. Only the soft, deliberate steps of Thomas Whitaker broke the stillness as he walked a slow circle around the group. "Bias doesn't always scream," he said, voice calm but razor-edged. "Most times it whispers, in a glance, in a pause, in the way one person is trusted, while another must prove they belong." He stopped directly in front of Diana Caldwell, staring at her like a judge delivering a final verdict. "You've demonstrated that you're unfit to lead. Not because you didn't recognize a customer, but because when you didn't, you defaulted to prejudice instead of curiosity." Thomas reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a thin folder. He handed it to Diana in front of everyone. "Termination notice, effective immediately. Your internal credentials have been revoked. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises. HR will follow up with formal documentation." Diana's face drained of color. Her hands trembled as she took the paper, unable to form a single word. There was nothing left to say, no defense strong enough to shield her from the truth now laid bare. Thomas turned to Rachel Monroe, Logan Price, and the 2 other tellers who had been present. "As for the rest of you, you'll enter a mandatory third-party training on unconscious bias within the next 30 days. During that time, all behavior will be closely monitored. And if we receive even one more complaint of discrimination in this branch, Thomas's gaze swept over them like a spotlight cutting through the midnight fog. You will face formal legal action from the executive board. That includes termination and, if warranted, civil prosecution. Rachel was speechless. Logan bowed his head, gripping his belt like he was trying to hold on to the last scrap of dignity. At the far end of the room, Andre Walker stood silently. When Thomas's eyes met his, the executive simply nodded, a quiet thank you for a quiet but unwavering act of courage. Julian Cole said nothing. He just stood there, tall, unmoved, like the shadow of a skyscraper, like the legacy he had built, not to dominate, but to remind. Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand firm. As the tension in the branch slowly eased, Julian turned and walked deliberately toward Andre Walker, the black security guard who hadn't budged, who'd held his ground without being loud. "Andre," Julian said, his voice no longer edged with confrontation, but filled with quiet respect. "Do you know what made me stay today?" Andre furrowed his brow slightly, unsure. Before he could answer, Julian continued. "It wasn't the anger. It was one small thing. You bent down, picked up my ID, and handed it back with both hands. No one else noticed that, but I did." Everyone in the room turned to look at Andre. His face remained composed, but there was something in his eyes now, something deeper than gratitude, something like restored belief. Thomas Whitaker stepped forward, standing beside Julian. In his hand, he held a sealed envelope with the Cole Dominion insignia. "Andre Walker," Thomas announced. "Per the recommendation of CEO Julian Cole, I'm proud to inform you that you are hereby promoted to head of security for the Midtown branch, effective immediately." A ripple of surprise and emotion swept through the room. Andre was stunned. I just did what was right." Julian placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Doing the right thing isn't easy in the wrong environment, but you did it quietly without expecting recognition. And for that, you deserve far more." Applause began, first soft, from a few younger staff members, then it grew, echoing across the marble lobby. It wasn't applause out of fear. It was respect real and earned. Andre bowed his head slightly. His eyes glistened, but his voice was steady. "I won't let you down." Julian smiled and took half a step back, letting Andre stand alone in the center of the applauding circle. For the first time, no longer a shadow at the door. As the clapping faded, Julian Cole turned and walked calmly back to the teller counter. Rachel Monroe was still behind it, but the haughty coldness on her face had completely crumbled. She kept her head down, avoiding his gaze, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. Thomas Whitaker gave a simple nod. Complete Mr. Cole's transaction. There was no objection. Rachel typed faster than she had all morning. This time, when Julian handed over his documents, she checked everything meticulously line by line. Every procedure was followed, every policy upheld. Within minutes, $15,000 was stacked neatly in bills and placed in front of him. But this time, it wasn't suspicious. It wasn't flagged. It was his money, returned with dignity and justice. Julian looked at Rachel. His voice was soft, but it rang through the quiet bank like a bell. "I don't need an apology." Rachel looked up, her lips parted as if to speak. But he raised a hand to stop her. "I just need you to remember one thing." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out his ID card, raising it under the overhead light. The reflection caught on the embossed words. Julian Cole, CEO, Cole Dominion Financial Group. The room went silent. No grandstanding. No drama. Just a simple, cutting truth that couldn't be denied. He slid the card back into his pocket, took the cash, and turned to Andre Walker, now head of security, and gave him a quiet nod. "Let's go." On the way to the door, Julian paused, scanning the space he had helped build from nothing. His eyes landed on Malik, the young man who had once looked at him in awe during the chaos. Julian placed a firm hand on his shoulder and said, gently, "Your generation, it has to build it all back better." Then he pushed open a glass door and stepped out into the midday Atlanta sun, where, for the first time that day, a light breeze stirred the air like a balm over a wound freshly stitched. The lesson that day wasn't just about a bank transaction. It was about human worth and how a system, any system, will change the moment power finally returns to the ones it once pushed aside.